Hello everybody, I am Monica Sakrani. Welcome to EPG Pathshala. We are now looking at the third module of family laws. In this module, we will be looking at law relating to maintenance, custody and restitution of conjugal rights for the course Legal Literacy. First, we shall look at custody. What is custody? Custody is physical control over a child. It is different from guardianship. A guardian may not have physical custody of a child but will continue to remain the legal guardian of the person. So till the age of 18, the custody of the child generally can be with the parents if the parents are living together, or they can give it to somebody else, so they can give it to the grandparents or whatever. So the parents as natural guardians generally have the first right over custody of a child. But what happens, the issue of custody becomes contentious when the parents don't live with each other and they live separately, or if one parent dies and the other parents grandparents or somebody else says that this parent is unfit to have the custody of the child and therefore the custody should be given to me. So then it becomes a contentious issue when it goes to court. So custody, how does the court decide whom the custody should be given to? Now the custody is generally decided, and custody is granted by the courts up to the age of 18. After that, the child has the right to go and live with whomever the child wants to live with. The child has the right to leave both the parents and live on their own or live with some other relative. So the child has that right. But till the age of 18, if there is an issue of custody which is not resolvable, then the child will not decide whom the child wants to live with. The court will decide whom the child has to live with. So the court will decide this on the basis of what you call the best interest of the child or the welfare of the child principle. Now this, they will look at whom will it be better for the child to live with. The child's wishes are taken into account in considering the best wishes of the best interest of the child or the welfare of the child, but the child's wishes do not finally lead to the decision of the court. It is only one of the considerations that the court takes into account while deciding the decision about whom the custody should be granted to. And generally the child can be, wishes are asked when the child is above 7 years of age and the child is in a position to make what is known as an intelligible preference. Now even if custody is granted to one of the persons, the other parent always has the right to have what is known as access or visitation rights. That means if I have the custody of my child, it does not mean that my husband doesn't have the right to meet my child or visit my child or get visits from the child. So this is now a compulsory part of custody and access. So access is the right of a parent and the right of a child. So it is the right of both and it is granted unless the parent who has the custody is able to show why the other parent should not have access. Generally, in some cases, allegations of sexual abuse are made, but it cannot be unsubstantiated allegations of sexual abuse. In fact, if they are unsubstantiated or the person is not able to prove them at all, the custody itself will be taken away from this parent and given to the other. Custody is always temporary. Please remember that if access is given to the other parent and the custodial parent refuses to give access to the child or comply with the conditions of access to the non-custodial parent, then the non-custodial parent can move the court and get the custody reversed and get the custody. So custody is always temporary. With changing circumstances, custody can change. Access and visitation are granted depending on where the non-custodial parent is living. So access and visitation could also mean that the child will come, and if both the parents are divorced and are living in different countries or different cities, then the non-custodial parent can get access of, say, summer vacation or weekend access. So it need not be only once a week or twice a week. It can also mean that you spend vacations with the other parent. So this is access and visitation rights. The non-custodial parent also continues to have full responsibility for the child, continues to be the guardian of the child unless the court decides that somebody else should be the guardian of the child. And now there is a new concept which is coming up, which is known as joint custody. Till now what we have been looking at is the concept of separate custody, but now there is this shared parenting or joint custody. There is a Law Commission report, the reference of that is there in your e-text, so you can look at that. So now increasingly this whole concept of joint custody or shared parenting is coming into play, where both the parents are given the rights over of looking after the child and the responsibilities of looking after the child. So we have now looked at custody. We now move on to looking at restitution of conjugal rights. Now this is a concept where one person, if the we looked at desertion in the last module. Now if suppose my husband or wife refuses to live with me, has left me and gone away, or has thrown me out of the house, and I do not want a divorce, I want to live with that person, then I have the right to go to the court and ask for restitution of my conjugal right. So I have to show that the person has withdrawn from the society of the other, and this means voluntary refusal to live with the person, and refusal to have sexual intercourse, or refusal to give comfort or company to the other. I have to show that there was no reasonable cause for the person to refuse to reside with me. If suppose the husband has, because restitution of conjugal rights has been strategically used by many husbands. In the last module we saw that failure to comply with the order of restitution of conjugal rights for 1 year gives rise to a ground for divorce, and the person can move for divorce. Generally divorce is granted on fault grounds. Now what happens is that in many cases the husband may ask the wife to, if the husband is having an affair with another woman, and so the wife leaves the husband and goes away, and the husband moves the court and asks for a restitution of conjugal rights, gets an order of restitution of conjugal rights, and then refuses to cohabit with the wife, and then after 1 year moves for divorce. So in this case, this kind of misuse should not take place. So if the wife is able to show that she has reasonable cause or reasonable reason to refuse to live with the husband, then he will not be granted restitution of conjugal rights. But the equal danger of the wife moving the court for restitution of conjugal rights is that if the husband is cohabiting with somebody else, or is having an affair with someone else, or wants a divorce, and the wife moves for restitution of conjugal rights, and if he refuses to cohabit with her, then after 1 year he also gets the right to divorce the wife. So we continue to look at what is reasonable cause. An act on the part of the petitioner which would constitute a ground for matrimonial relief, for divorce, annulment, or judicial separation. So basically if one person I have the right to fault grounds for divorce, then that is reasonable reason for me. So if my husband beats me up, I don't live with him. So that is reasonable cause. If he files for restitution, I can refuse to live with him. Or any matrimonial misconduct which is grave but not a ground for matrimonial relief, that could also constitute a ground for restitution of conjugal rights. Or an act or omission or conduct, so it may not amount to gross cruelty, but if there is some amount of cruelty which is a little but not high enough for me to get a ground to get a divorce, then that would amount to reasonable cause. Or an act or omission or conduct which makes it impossible for the respondent to live with the petitioner. Now if any of these causes are there, then the court will refuse to grant restitution of conjugal rights to the other person. Now restitution, how do you enforce restitution? I may get an order for restitution, but does that mean that actually I can force a person to live with me? So generally it can be only enforced on paper, and it cannot be, you cannot force a person to actually live with you. So you get the right to divorce if the order is not complied with. Now restitution of conjugal rights has been challenged. The constitutional validity of this law has been challenged several times. The Andhra Pradesh High Court had struck down this provision by saying it's unconstitutional in Sarita's case. Immediately after that, the Punjab and Haryana High Court upheld the constitutional validity of the provision. Now the matter came up before the Supreme Court in Suman Rani's case, which you can read about more in your e-text. Now in this case, the husband was living with somebody else and he filed for restitution of conjugal rights. When the wife came to live with the husband, came to the house, he threw her out of the house, and after 1 year said that she did not come and stay with him and filed for divorce. Now the wife challenged his divorce petition, saying that it was because of him actually that she could not live with him, and in this case the court refused to grant the husband divorce on grounds that the restitution of conjugal rights was not complied with. It also upheld the constitutional validity of restitution of conjugal rights. Now, the most famous case with regards to restitution of conjugal rights is an old historical case called Rakhmabai's case, which actually deals with the issues which are problematic, the problems relating to restitution of conjugal rights. This case took place in 1870s, and this was a case where Rakhmabai was married when she was 11 years old to her husband, and she did not live with him till the age of 22. She was living with her stepfather. She was married off by her grandparents, and then she will continue to live with her with her stepfather, and she refused to go and live with her husband when he asked her to live with him. So he filed a case for restitution of conjugal rights. Now the court ordered that she should go and live with the husband, and she refused to live with the husband, and therefore she was actually jailed. So, but she refused to go and live with the husband, and she said that I would rather go to jail than be forced to live with my husband. And Rakhmabai later on became one of the first doctors in this country, and she went to England and did her medicine, but she refused to live with her husband. Now the issue with restitution of conjugal rights is that this is actually a remedy which has come through, it is a remedy which has come through the English law of matrimonial relations, and it is not an Indian law. In Indian law, in any of the Indian customary laws, restitution of conjugal rights was not available at all, but this has come in now, and its constitutional validity also has been upheld. Now we look at the law of maintenance. Under all the matrimonial laws, there is a provision for maintenance, application for maintenance in case any other matrimonial remedy is sought. So suppose the husband has filed for divorce or the wife has filed for divorce, she also can ask for maintenance for herself and her children. If the husband has filed for divorce also, the wife can make an application for maintenance for herself. So all matrimonial laws give the remedy of maintenance. Maintenance can be granted pending the hearing of the case and afterwards also. So it is also known as alimony. So you have alimony which is pending the case, and you have permanent alimony, which is after the case is finally decided, this amount is granted to the wife. Maintenance under the matrimonial laws can also be lump sum maintenance or maintenance which is monthly maintenance. So all matrimonial, but suppose I do not go to court for a matrimonial remedy and I just want maintenance. My husband has asked me to leave the house. I do not want to divorce him. I do not want to go to live with him. I have reasonable cause not to live with him, and therefore I just want maintenance, or I have children, I want maintenance for them. So I can move the court just for maintenance under section 125 to section 127 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. So this is a secular law for maintenance. It is there in the Criminal Procedure Code because the Criminal Procedure Code does not only talk about how to investigate a case or how to deal with a case after a crime has occurred, it has also got provisions for prevention of crime. And one of the reasons for prevention of crime is destitution. Destitution could lead to vagrancy, and therefore to prevent that, the provisions for maintenance have been made, because in India we do not have a social welfare law which makes it compulsory for the state to provide for those who are indigent. It is the family which provides social welfare to the family members. If there is a family member who is unable to provide for themselves, then it is my responsibility to take care of that person. So family becomes the main apparatus. So under 127, it is not just the wife and children who are entitled to maintenance, but also parents who are entitled to maintenance. Apart from that, there are also other laws which provide for maintenance. For Hindus, there is the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. We will be looking at this act in a little bit of detail because it gives certain, it is the only law which sets out what is the criteria for fixing the quantum of maintenance. Now under 125 and the maintenance is only monthly maintenance. There is no provision for lump sum maintenance. For Muslim women, there is the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act. Now, Muslim women under section 125 to 127, even a divorced wife is entitled to maintenance. But this led to under the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act, divorced Muslim women are covered under this law, and non-divorced Muslim women or wives are covered under 125. We will be looking at the debates which arose out of the Shah Banu case in a little while. Apart from that, there are other laws like the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, which talks about monetary relief as well as compensation orders which can be granted to women under this law. Now, we will be looking at the Hindu law of maintenance. Under the Hindu Marriage Act, even the husband is entitled to maintenance and the wife is also entitled to maintenance even if it is a void marriage. So the Hindu law, the Hindu Marriage Act gives both the husband as the wife the right to maintenance, and the wife has the right to maintenance even if it is a void marriage. Now when can you claim maintenance? Generally you have to show that you are not able to maintain yourself. Under any law, you are entitled to maintenance only if you cannot maintain yourself. If you have enough money, if you have a job, if you have property, then you cannot claim maintenance just because it is a legal right. You claim maintenance only if you cannot maintain yourself. So that is the precondition for claiming maintenance. The second thing is that you have to claim a specific amount. You can't just say I want maintenance. You have to ask for a specific amount of money and you have to justify why you're asking for that amount of money. So you have to show what your expenses are, what are your needs, and if you have an income. So for example, if I'm earning but I'm not earning enough to take care of my needs, I'm earning a small amount of money, a pittance amount of money, then I disclose that this is my income and I'm not able, this is my needs and I'm not able to take care, this is the shortfall, therefore I need this kind of money, so I claim maintenance. So it is not necessary that if I'm working I cannot claim maintenance. I can still claim maintenance if I'm not earning enough to maintain myself. The second thing is that if I have children, I can claim maintenance on behalf of the children. Maintenance is granted for children only up to the age of 18, but daughters are generally granted maintenance till they are married. So even major daughters are granted maintenance up to the time that they get married. But a son is generally not granted maintenance till he after the age of 18. So then the Supreme Court in various judgments has said that the mother can claim maintenance for the son as part of her maintenance. So when I'm showing my expenses of rent, food, other expenses, my travel, my illness, if I have medical expenses, then I also show my son's expenses as part of my expenses for claiming maintenance. When I'm claiming maintenance for children, I have to show how much I'm spending, what is the school fee. If I have receipts, I have to show that. If I have to show that there is bus fee, etc., etc., I have to bring in all that. Plus then I compute the food expenses, the taking care expenses, the rent, the clothes, the other expenses, and then I ask for maintenance. Suppose I'm asking for maintenance for my child and I'm also earning and the husband is also earning. If both the wife and the husband are earning, and then the custodial parent is asking for maintenance from the non-custodial parent for the child, then the court may say that if both are earning equally, then both should contribute towards the child, and both may pay whatever the expenses of the child are. Each may be asked to pay half the amount of money. So suppose I am taking care of the children and I am saying that 5,000 or 10,000 rupees is the amount that a child's maintenance cost. then the court may say that you are also earning, so the husband may be directed to pay 5,000 rupees. So the court can direct maintenance, or I am not earning enough, my husband is earning more, so I may be asked to contribute a smaller amount and my husband may be asked to contribute a larger amount. So maintenance is decided on the basis of your expenses. So generally what the court looks at is what is the husband's income and property. So they don't just go by income tax records, but they also look at what are the properties that are there, what is the standard of living of both the parties, what is the social status of the parties, the conduct of both the wife and the husband, the reasonable needs of the wife, which includes at the very minimum her needs such as food, clothing, residence and medical expenses. If the wife has any income, then what is the value of her income or her property, the number of dependents that are there on the husband, and then the court decides that this is the amount of maintenance that has to be paid. Now under the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, the wife can claim maintenance on the ground that the husband has treated her with cruelty, he has deserted her without her consent, he is neglecting her, or he is suffering from a virulent form of leprosy, or has another wife or mistress living, or has converted to another religion. So these form just causes for the wife to live alone, and then she can claim maintenance, and the quantum will be decided on the basis of what we have already stated. The wife also has the right to claim separate residence, and under the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, it is not just the wife but also the parents, the unmarried children and the widowed daughter-in-law who can claim maintenance from the father-in-law. Now we come to the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act. Now under Sharia law, we all know that as we saw in the previous modules, that the Sharia Act made the application of Sharia made the Sharia applicable to Muslims. Now in the Sharia Act, it is said that Sharia will apply to the question of maintenance also. Now the argument in Shah Banu's case was that she had applied under 125 CRPC after her divorce, and she had said that she should get maintenance, and the court had ordered maintenance. Her husband was a lawyer, and he said that that Muslims are governed by the Sharia Act, and the Sharia Act says that the maintenance has to be paid only up to the iddat period. As we have done earlier, iddat period is the period of 3 months if the woman is not menstruating after divorce. If she is pregnant, then till the birth of the child, and if she is menstruating, then 3 menstrual periods after divorce is the iddat period, or after the death of the husband is the iddat period. So he said that he is supposed to pay her maintenance only up to the iddat period. After that, it is not his responsibility to pay her maintenance, and 125 will not apply to her. Now in this case, the Supreme Court said that she will be entitled to maintenance. Divorced Muslim women are entitled to maintenance beyond the iddat period also. And this case led to the passing of the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act, which said that the husband will pay maintenance or pay reasonable and fair provision in maintenance to the wife within the iddat period. After the iddat period, it was said that the wife will either apply to her other legal heirs for maintenance, or if there are no legal heirs or legal heirs are not able to take care of her, then she has to go to what is known as a Waqf board. A Waqf board is a charitable trust, so she has to move the Waqf board and ask for maintenance from the Waqf board. So this is what basically the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act says. Now this law was challenged by women's organizations, saying that it's unconstitutional because it discriminates between Muslim women who are not divorced and those who are divorced Muslim women and other women, and 125 should continue to apply. It was also challenged by Dania Latifi, under whose name this case has come to be reported. Dania Latifi was Shah Banu's lawyer. He also challenged the constitutional validity of this law. Now when this law came into force, Muslim women started applying before the magistrates court for divorced Muslim women started applying under Section 3 of the Act, which said that the husband has to make fair and reasonable provision and pay maintenance to the wife within the iddat period. Now, within the iddat period, they started moving these courts and claiming maintenance in lump sum for their entire lifetime. So, they were not claiming maintenance only for the iddat period, they were claiming maintenance for a lifetime, because the law does not specify that it has to be maintenance for the iddat period, it says within the iddat period. So many of these cases, and the court started granting maintenance to these women for the entire lifetime within the iddat period, and a lump sum was being granted to these women. So many of these cases also came up on appeals by the husbands to the Supreme Court, and finally the decision was held in Dania Latifi's case, where it was held that a Muslim husband is, the constitutional validity of this law was upheld, and it was held to be constitutionally valid, and it was held that the Muslim husband is liable to make reasonable and fair provision for the future of the divorced wife, which includes her maintenance extending beyond the iddat period within the iddat period. So basically what the wives were contending, that they are entitled to maintenance not just for the iddat period but beyond the iddat period, has been granted to them, and the Supreme Court has held that the Muslim husband has to pay her maintenance. The liability of the Muslim husband to his divorced wife to pay maintenance is not confined to iddat period but should be for a lifetime. And if she has not remarried and who is not able to maintain herself after the iddat period, can go under section 4 against her relatives, and if the relatives are not able to pay, she can go to the Waqf board and claim maintenance. So this is the law with regards to maintenance for Muslim divorced women. Now we will look at section 125 of the CRPC. It says that if a person has sufficient means and neglects to maintain his wife who is unable to maintain herself, his legitimate or illegitimate minor child, whether married or not, unable to maintain itself, so both legitimate as well as illegitimate children. So wife, even if she is not the second wife, even if there is no void marriage and the child is illegitimate, the father of the child has to maintain the child. And legitimate or illegitimate child not being a married daughter who has attained majority, where such child is by reason of any physical or mental abnormality or injury unable to maintain himself. A married daughter is also entitled to claim maintenance if she is able to show that her husband is not able to maintain her, or the father or mother unable to maintain himself or herself. Now what does sufficient means mean? The courts have held that sufficient means that the person is able to work and earn. Need not be that he is earning a certain amount of money or has a job. Even a person who has no job, if the person is able-bodied, is held to be of sufficient means, and the courts have granted maintenance to the dependents on the basis of that. Now what is to be done is that you move the court. Where there is a family court, you move the family court. Where there is no family court, the applicant moves the magistrate and shows that the person has been neglected and that the person is entitled to maintenance. As stated earlier, you have to prove what is the amount of maintenance that you require, and you have to show your expenses, you have to show your bills and claim that amount, and you will be granted. Now suppose I have got maintenance under the Hindu Marriage Act and I have also filed an application under 125, and I am granted 5,000 rupees in one and 5,000 rupees in another, then the husband has to pay me only 5,000 rupees. He does not have to pay me 5,000 plus 5,000. If I have disclosed to this in this application that I have already been granted 2,000 rupees maintenance and I am seeking further maintenance over here, then the court will take into account the 5,000 rupees already granted to me while deciding the case, and then I will be paid the difference amount. So that is so I cannot keep going to different forums and getting different orders and get the maintenance. I have to disclose the amount, or if there is one amount which is granted to me, then that lump sum will be granted to me, the larger amount, and not the total amount cumulatively. So when an application is made, the interim maintenance can be granted as well as final maintenance can be granted. Wife is not entitled to maintenance if she is living separately unjustifiably, or when the husband is willing to maintain her if she lives with him. So that is one thing. Or when she's living under mutual, if they are living separately under mutual agreement, or if she is living in adultery, she has to have just cause for maintenance. A divorced wife is entitled to maintenance till she remarries. In all maintenance cases, amounts can be varied or stopped. So if today I don't have a job and I'm applying for maintenance, and tomorrow I have a job, my husband can make an application saying that she's now got a job and therefore she's not entitled to maintenance anymore. If I have a job and I've not got maintenance, and tomorrow I don't have a job, and I fall sick, or my expenses have gone up, I can always ask for maintenance to be granted to me, or for my amount to be enhanced. So these are the maintenance amount is can be always varied. A right to maintenance includes the right to residence. There have been Supreme Court judgments. Achala Anand's case says that the right to residence is a part of right to maintenance. Under 125, the courts have continuously held that the wife has to be a legal wife. A woman in a void marriage cannot be granted maintenance. But in a recent case in 2014 in Badshah versus Urmila Godse's case, the court held that the second wife is also entitled to maintenance because it is a beneficial legislation, it is a social legislation, and therefore she should not be denied maintenance under this law. So now we have, in this module, we have looked at the law relating to custody, the law relating to restitution of conjugal rights, and the law relating to maintenance. Thank you very much. Please read the e-text for more information.